Devil May Cry 2, released 2003 for the PlayStation 2, later bundled with DMC 1 and 3 for later generations. Got a PS2 copy, but for this review, I'll be going off the PS4 version. Okay, where to start with this game? DMC 2 is seen as the black sheep of the series. Where the reboot is looked down on for its faults with customization and story from the fanbase, its gameplay and environments can be pretty entertaining. DMC 2 on the other hand is just a mess. But, personally for me there is some good elements and fun to be had with the game, which I'll get into later after I go through all the issues, and there is a lot. I will be saying a lot through this review in the previous game, because there's so much to compare with the first game. First thing though, knowing how the development took place puts in perspective a lot of how we got the project we did with DMC 2. Let's talk about that. DMC 2 started development within Capcom under a new group that was arcade-eccentric. I know, really weird. To make things worse, because of that, this team didn't have much experience with 3D design and animations. As well as they weren't a big team to begin with. It was later discovered that Hideki Kamiya, creator of the first game, didn't even know the second game started development until a later date when he was helping develop the DMC 1 novel. Seriously Capcom? That's nuts. The previous team, Team Little Devils, weren't involved this time. From what I've read, I think some people from that previous team did move over. The new team basically wanted to do their own thing. Early on it was said the game wouldn't have even had Dante in it. We did end up getting Dante, but they changed his personality. They weren't too fond of his jokey style from the previous game. Now with headcanon you can look at that change in many different ways, which I will get into later. And so we get a more serious and quiet Dante. I'll go into that a little later as well. They did have big ambitions with the game though, giving us 2 campaigns and large levels to explore. Close to the end of development, the director of the game ended up leaving. It's not said who this was. Capcom got in a replacement with 4 months left on development. Hideaki Unsuno took the reins. Unsuno has since talked about the development of DMC 2, saying this: "There was a lot of drama over my replacing the old director, and I have nothing but bad memories about that part in particular. But basically they said that nothing was getting done and that it needed to change. The scenario hadn't been written, the cutscenes had yet to be shot, and they hadn't decided what to do about Dante's devil trigger. They had determined that at least the stinger attack was essential, so at least they had someone who was going to take care of that. But none of the other attacks had been worked on at all. The fact that the game was in somewhat of a finished state within 4 months is insane. The whole situation is a mess. Makes me annoyed how Capcom was so careless with the sequel of a game that was so groundbreaking at the time. Unsuno got to have another crack with the series, giving us DMC 3. And damn is that game a redemption story if I've ever seen it. Though of course you can't blame DMC 2 on the man, he just fixed what he could. Capcom made sure to credit him as the director for the game even though he came in at the end. No wonder he wanted to make another game to prove himself. Anyway, let's crack open DMC 2. I'll mainly be discussing Dante's campaign with brief notes on Lucia's campaign throughout too. I won't be going into detail with features that were carried over from the previous game, like most items you can use in the previous game are back, and you still have ranking systems with combat and levels. I'll be talking about what is different or new in this video. So give my DMC 1 video a watch if you want to know more about starting features. Dante is called on a new job by a new protagonist, Lucia. A character brought in because of an online survey saying how people wanted to play Trish in the first game. After a big exchange of words,
You called? Till next time, son of Sparta.
Dante heads to her homeland to get more info on his big new job. Now DMC2 doesn't really have much of a story. You hardly get any info at the start or end of missions. The little story we get is spread out over 2 campaigns, with a lot not being explained. So you'll be mainly confused as to what is going on and why you're doing what you're doing. You will mainly get just blank stares at the screen from different characters. And so I'll go through all the story beats now and then give my thoughts on the main characters involved. We're tasked to defeat Arius, a businessman within the company called Ouroboros Corporation. His goal is mortality and allowing his master Argosax to come through into the human world by collecting a bunch of holy relics hidden throughout Vidali. In Lucia's campaign you were finding these relics for safekeeping, while in Dante's campaign you were killing demons basically. We found out Lucia is a creation just like Trish.
Well, it appears that the defect is back.
Defect?
You are my creation.
Liar! Mathieu is my mother.
She merely found you when you were about to be disposed of.
We get an interesting plot line with her thinking about ending it all to keep herself from hurting others. But I thought her plot line was a bit too close to Trish from the previous game. They both cry and Dante mentions how devils don't cry.
Dante.
Trish, devils never cry.
I'll go. I'm expendable. You don't need to worry about me. I'm happy if I can die like a human.
No. Devils never cry.
Basically, exactly the same shit. Dante defeats Arius before he can complete the ritual, but a portal opens anyway to the demon world, which Dante continues through to finish the main demon inside. Lucia stays back to finish off 2 forms of Arius and then awaits Dante's return. The ending boss fight for Lucia wasn't bad, it wasn't hard at all, but I liked the design of the boss and the second form. The final boss fight with Dante is probably the best in the whole game. Reminds me of Angelo from the previous game. And it was a little tough too, which was nice. There was a perfect setup for Dante to say jackpot in this scene. Here, I'll fix it.
Jackpot.
After defeating the demon, Dante is trapped in the demon world and goes on his merry way. Lucia is chilling at his shop and hears him arrive outside. The end. Oh yeah, and Dante flips the same sided coin for some reason throughout the campaign too. Doesn't really add much, especially since he is doing the job. So the coin flip is just for shits and gigs, I guess. I mean, he is a devil hunter after all, so why would he not do the job? It's just weird and comes off awkward, especially after Granny asks for you to save her daughter.
There is one more thing I need to ask of you, son of Sparta. My daughter went to face Arius all by herself. Please, take these and save Lucia.
If it's heads. Your lucky streak continues, Granny.
Dante only does it because of the developers thought it was cool. It's not. Now I've skipped a lot of details, but honestly the story doesn't have a lot of meat to it. You are hardly shown many cutscenes throughout, and the ones you get, there's hardly any dialogue a lot of the time. So many things are not explained in the story. Why did the portal to the demon world open even though the ritual wasn't completed? Why was Lucia disguised in the scene only to reveal herself straight away? How was Lucia created and why? What's the deal with this demon building? There's so many questions this game leaves and they are never answered. Overall, the story does feel more for Lucia though. We get somewhat of an arc to Lucia with her overcoming her fears of being a demon. She believed she was birthed with powers to protect her land, something common within her family. But turns out she was a demon creation. Her whole world comes crashing down. Everything she knew was a lie. Though I think that's all great in writing, the execution didn't really make me feel for her. Scenes like where Granny says the family is more than blood are nice though.
Yes, it is true that we are not tied by blood. But our ties are bound by history and experience, which is much deeper than blood.
I do think she is an interesting character though. She looks great, her powers are cool, and the weapons she uses. She comes off as a real selfless and caring character. It's a shame that we haven't seen her again in more recent content with the series. She was mentioned in the DMC5 prequel novel, so maybe she'll make an appearance one day again. How is Dante in DMC2? Well, Dante is in the background. He's just there and the story revolves around him. Dante ends the game the same way he started. There's no development to him at all. I will say, though Dante hardly speaks, we do get some good lines throughout with him.
You must repent your sins.
Don't speak. Just die.
You switched them?
A false coin for a false god.
I was going to be the king of this world!
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
He just comes off really uninspired in this game overall. He's bored. Just going through the motions. Now there's something to be said about Dante mourning his brother from the previous game. Plus he did defeat Mundus, which was a big driving point for him. So now he doesn't have that fire anymore. This is all just headcanon, of course. Hell, if you want to go deeper within the current timeline we have with headcanon, DMC2 is right in the middle of the timeline. With DMC3 and 1, Dante lost his brother twice, gained his revenge on Mundus, also learned a lot through all those struggles in those games. DMC2, he is now comfortable and somewhat depressed. Then we go to the next two games, 4 and 5, leaning more to hope. Dante finds hope in Nero. Then Dante would later be reunited with his brother. So thinking about all that, DMC2 Dante isn't too much of a stretch within today's time. I think if we ever got a remake of DMC2, we could get those ideas more flashed out. Now going over the other characters of note in DMC2, Arius, he was fine. I don't think he was much of a compelling villain with the amount of dialogue and screen time he gets. I did find it weird though that his personality changes near the end of the game for some reason. He mainly acts tough and is tamed, but near the end he becomes a complete weirdo.
Then why did you come here? Let me guess. You seek my death.
Die!
Now I'll absorb his power. I will become an all-powerful immortal.
The other character to note is Granny, aka Mattia. Just a standard Granny. I do find it funny she fought alongside Sparta. I'm sure she was a warrior back then, but it's just funny to think seeing her now. Alright, let's get into gameplay. Gameplay is shaped from the first game, so everything is pretty much the same. Well, it may look that way, but what is different is the feeling when playing, as well as the details are lacking in many fields. Combat has lost that impact feeling that was so heavy in the previous game. When you connect, it doesn't feel justified. I talked about the feeling of impact in my previous DMC video, where the game has a lot of mechanics to work with each other to make you feel impactful in combat. Most of that is gone, especially with melee. It doesn't help you feel engaged in combat. Using your sword feels so stiff and slow compared to the previous game. The stinger attack doesn't feel impactful at all, which is nuts. Swordplay just feels so off, especially comparing it to the previous entry. The game's combat controls are noticeably different from those of the first game as well. Melee weapon combos are based on pressing the analog stick in conjunction with the attack button, rather than of the timing of the attack button presses alone. It's a little hard to get used to, especially since this is the only game in the series that does it. But once you get a feel for it, it's not too bad. Basically, hit once, then change to the direction of the stick, hit twice, then change the direction of the stick, so on. You can change combos up to 4 hits, as well as there's different combos for the devil trigger, which is really nice. Guns on the other hand is the complete opposite with impact. Guns are way too powerful now. In DMC 1 you would use your guns until you closed the distance. Even though they did deal damage, it was only a small amount. You would have to get in close to really cause damage. In this game though, you can comfortably just use your guns at a distance and be content in that. That's not good at all. Just makes a lot of encounters easy to take advantage of and very boring. When in DMC 1 you actually had to be smart within each battle, and your foes wouldn't let you just sit at a distance. The game feels like it's meant to be a shooter instead of a hack and slash game because of how overpowered the guns are and the swords feel so whack. Makes even more sense when you see some of the promotion material for the game. None of that helps with how easy the game is now. They took public cries at the first game being too hard and turned the dial all the way down. Standard enemies hardly engage with you. You can comfortably just walk past a lot of encounters. Most of the boss fights can be won by shooting at a distance. They made the game way too easy and you can never feel that accomplished like you did with the previous game completing tough areas or bosses. One thing I miss from the original is seeing weapon animations when switching weapons, as well as getting a sick cutscene to show off your new weapon when you acquire it. You are basically just picking up weapons as you go through and that's it. You don't feel the need to check them out because of how lazy it feels. Speaking of, the other swords are basically pointless. They don't really vary from one another, so you were just best to stick with your starting weapon, which is really disappointing when you had weapons like Ifrit or Sparta that got a cool cutscene, and you wanted to check out those weapons as well as each weapon was unique. Guns in the DMC2 are your standard affair in the game, nothing special. With upgrades as well, it's never said what you gain when upgrading. You don't know if you've gained new moves or if your weapons have increased damage. It's so weird and just feels chucked together. You don't really feel any progression. You do actually gain damage, but nothing points that out to you. It all just comes off pointless and waste of orbs. In the previous game you got excited to try out new moves you bought and would work towards getting it all. There's no need to really bother about weapon upgrades in this game. So personally I found myself mainly focusing on upgrading the devil trigger and health. The things that have been added in gameplay is you now have a button dedicated to rolling, which is good fun. Being able to roll and run on walls is fun, especially doing a bunch of flips. Stuff walking or running when you can flip your way around. I do enjoy that feature, especially since most levels are massive with nothing really in them, so you got to get some fun in between combat. But within combat I really only used the button to close distance. Outside of that I would go back to how I played in the previous game, dodging with the jump button. Another new feature is a weapon change button. which allows the player to circle through ranged weapons without going into the inventory system. Which is very welcome since I stuck to just the pistols in the previous game most of the time to avoid going through the menus. The amulet system is new as well. This system is in line with your devil trigger. It allows you to change your abilities, making it so you can fly or move faster, or adding different effects to your sword like fire, lightning or ice when you're in devil form. I think this is a good feature. It helps to mix up gameplay if you choose to. Personally, I didn't find myself going into this system too much though. Getting into more detail with levels. There's a big problem with the game having large levels being completely empty. Hardly any enemies to fill those environments or things to find or do, or look at. Most environments are boring and copy-pasted. In the previous game you could interact with environments and pretty much all of the environments looked interesting and lived in. Most of the environments in DMC2 just feel like game levels. No charm in them or interesting things to look at. Completely wasted spaces throughout levels. They really could have had more closed in spaces filled with things instead of these large open levels of nothing. The previous game's environments were closed in and you weren't left running around for too long without something happening. Whether that's demons or environmental things. You'll be running through environments in DMC2 for good lengths of nothing happening. It feels so weird. So much wasted development. Sometimes you'll get platforming sections and levels that will add to gameplay, but the platforming in the game feels so off for some reason. I found myself jumping around so much, missing platforms when I thought I had it. Maybe I'm just shit, who knows. The camera doesn't help at all though. The camera in the previous game wasn't the best either, but at times DMC2 can be even worse. It zooms in way too much within combat, and so most of the time your opponent will be off screen. Sometimes I would get motion sickness a little when the camera was being so crazy. Now with the Devil May Cry series, the bosses I always found were the main attraction with each game. It's kinda hard to say that with this game. No boss really stood out to me in a good way. Some of the bosses stood out to me because of bad gameplay. The ones that didn't stand out were just alright. There's a section where you fight infected tanks. It is somewhat explained. The machinery is taken over by a thing called the Infested. But you wouldn't know that unless you researched outside of the game. They could have done a cutscene showing the thing infecting tanks or helicopters, but because we are not shown that, you are left thinking it's pretty silly seeing a demon tank. And what's even worse is all you need to do is get right up next to them and just keep pressing the attack button and they can't do anything about it. If you want to deal more damage, you can jump on top of the tank and you'll be prone to damage from there. So really, why not just stay next to the tank? The game doesn't force the player out of easy tactics. After the tanks, we fight a infected helicopter. Now the boss fight itself here is boring because you can just stand around shooting it with your pistols until you win. Well, what I do like is the environments around it. Platforming up the tower where the place was burning down wasn't too bad. And I actually really enjoyed climbing up the top of buildings afterwards to where you fight and finish the helicopter at the very top. Seeing down the city from high was nice. You really get the feeling of scale. And you could get knocked off which sent you flying so far down. I enjoyed all that. We get a similar setup with multiple boss fights with the demon like Angelo from the previous game. But this time he has 2 spirit dogs and there isn't any story connected to the guy. I feel like that's a wasted opportunity. The fights were okay, but why is he fighting us? It is explained he is after us for revenge because of Sparta, as stated in an art book. But none of that is explained in the game, so unless you go out of your way to read up on that info, you will never know. Just like the weapons, we don't get much cutscenes introducing bosses or new enemy types, so a lot of introductions are underwhelming. I feel like I'm being very negative in this review, but really it's warranted with this game coming out the way it did. Oh, let me just mention, whose idea was it to put this water level with Lucia in the game? Terrible! Should have learnt from DMC1. Now I still find myself enjoying this game even with all its faults. The other Devil May Cry games are built to test you heavily. They are games you have to get good at if you want to make the most out of them. DMC2 though is the only game in the series that isn't really much of a challenge compared to the others. Now, like I mentioned before, you can take advantage of most situations because of your guns and the AI isn't the brightest. In any other DMC game, on higher difficulties, you felt accomplished defeating a tough boss or area. DMC2, most of the time I didn't really struggle even at high difficulties. Now you may say that is a bad thing, because now you don't feel that accomplishment. But maybe that's why I find myself enjoying it. It's the only DMC game I can just turn my brain off and enjoy some silly combat and flips around environments. If I want a rewarding and challenging experience, I'll go play any of the other games. If I want just dumb fun, DMC2 is a great option. Once you've gone through the game and you know what you're in for, it's definitely easy to get into a comfortable zone with the game having that mindless fun. Talking about more things I like, Dante's design for DMC2 is really good. It might be my favourite design of his throughout the series. If only we got the designers unlockable for DMC5. Maybe a later game will give you all costumes from previous games. Capcom. DMC2 also has a great soundtrack. Really enjoyed the atmosphere of the overall soundtrack. Environments feel gloomy, alone and dark. I really like the moody atmosphere the soundtrack brings. And when the game kicks off, the soundtrack definitely follows. This soundtrack is up there for one of the best in the series, I think. The demon form is really good, especially the flying aspects, since they've been expanded more as well. And you get a secret form. The form is not documented in any version of the game's manual, seamlessly intended as a secret to the player to discover. It is activated if Dante uses his devil trigger while at less than 10% health. This form basically makes you invincible. You deal so much damage and you can't take damage while in the form. It's so easy to let yourself get into that red with the health, then completely make a fool out of whoever you are facing. The form definitely looks cool though and wouldn't make another appearance in the series into DMC5. With the side content of DMC5, the secret missions are back, but they are introduced in a very lazy way. They are basically just rooms where you fight a set amount of demons. That's it. The previous game has very unique secret rooms, each with their own tasks to complete. It's just a step down with how they went with DMC2's secret rooms. Really pointless. Especially since you can just do that in the new Bloody Palace mode, which is a great addition. This mode has since been a staple within the series. So if you had to thank DMC2 for anything, thank it for the great Bloody Palace mode. Also, you can play Trish in the game, a secret unlockable for finishing hard difficulty, just like the previous game with Spider being playable. And she plays just like Dante from the previous game, which makes me think, why not just bring that combat into the game to begin with? She is fun to play and a welcome addition to the overall package. Also, if you finish the game on Dante Must Die, you can change into Dante's DMC1 outfit, as well as you can get his Force Edge. And music from the first game plays in some battles too. Now that's a pretty sick unlockable. DMC2 is a big step down from the legendary groundwork the first game broke. I do find myself playing DMC2 every couple of years when I do a series playthrough, and though I still think DMC2 is the worst game of the series, I do enjoy the mindless fun that it brings. If I wasn't a big fan of the series, maybe I wouldn't look down on the game so lightly, who knows. I do think this game has so much potential within it, so many great ideas. The execution was just a massive misfire. Personally, I think DMC2 would make for a great remake. Bring out the wasted potential it has. I think it could serve to be one of the best DMC games if the content and ideas here are done justice. But that could be a topic for another video. With that, if this video served to entertain, maybe think about liking, sharing or subscribing. I will be continuing the Devil May Cry series, so stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching.